there are reports of a shooting at the Islamic Center of San Diego. There is an active shooter report there. Again, this is video from just a few moments ago. Police are asking people to avoid that area completely. This is happening just east of Mission Bay. It appears there's at least one casualty. We are working to get more information on this. Now, there also might be a special report from ABC News. If that happens, we're going to bring that to you. We'll keep the images of the fire in Simi Valley on the screen. Again, this is a report of a shooting at an Islamic Center of San Diego, which is Claremont, 20 minutes north of downtown. Now, one of the things that we're going to tell you about as well.
It's already over. 3 dead suspects.
If you have
two killed themselves,
or you know of somebody that might be going to San Diego today, the Dodgers are playing in San Diego. Petco Field is in downtown San Diego. Claremont is 20 minutes north of downtown. So just to give you an idea,
not three.
If you know of someone who might be traveling to San Diego, possibly to go to the Dodger game, understand that there is now breaking news in San Diego. Reports of an active shooter. People are asked to avoid the area. This is in Claremont. Again, 20 minutes north of downtown.
2 dead suspects, age 17 and 19.
Report, again, we will bring that to you.
Yeah, they killed themselves, right?
The images of the fire in Simi Valley on the screen, so you can see.
I think that's what people are saying.
Heavy police presence after reports of an active shooter at this Islamic Center.
Great.
Such sad images coming out of San Diego. You see the little kids walking.
I mean, what a relief.
Terrible to see.
Not another fucking retard that they're gonna drag out and do this. And it's so sad. I mean, I think it's obviously really bad. A security guard was killed. Oh, shit. So 3 people were killed, and they killed 1 security guard, and then they ended up killing themselves. Holy shit. President Trump has been briefed. What the fuck, man? That's awful. Yeah, I don't even know what... 5 total? Wait, 5 total people were killed? Oh, my God. And 5 died, 2 suspects. Jesus, man. It's being blamed on Zionists on Twitter. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, it wasn't one. I mean, there was one of these guys that did that was like an atheist. Like, he left Islam. I mean, like, I don't think that necessarily just because something like, if a mosque gets attacked, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's somebody from like a different religion. It could be somebody that's unhappy with that religion. I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't think anybody knows what happened. So where is this here? Islamic Center, Islamophobia. Like, I mean, this is the kind of stuff, right? Islamophobia. We don't even know why it happened. We don't, like, well, how do we know about this at all? Yeah, I have no idea. Like, it's just crazy. I mean, again, like, this is, there are reports the suspects might be Muslim. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think, like, why would you even say this? It's friendly fire. They left suicide notes. Oh, great. An uncorroborated claim that hate speech was written on the firearm. Reports that are the kids left an anti-Muslim sewer slide note. I don't even know what that means. They said they found a suicide note and hate speech on the guns. Yeah, I guess we're going to have to wait and find out. Hate speech was scrawled on one of the weapons used in the shooting. Law enforcement says, what does it say? About racial pride. Additionally, hate speech was scrawled on their, like, but what's being said? Like, I don't even, they're blaming this on Israel. Of course they're blaming it on Israel. Rip victims. I hope the suspects burn. I mean, they're dead, right? I mean, so, I mean, that's done. Problem solved there, right? And why are a lot of shooters writing on their weapons? Because the reason why is the media. The reason why shooters do all of this stuff is because we talk about it and we glorify it. Like, in my opinion, I would be okay if they had a law where, like, I mean, I don't know. It does go against the First Amendment, right? So, like, I'm not even really, I guess I'm not really advocating for this, but I do think that, like, this is the reason why it's happening, is that basically inside of American media, they plaster a person's manifesto, all the photos of them, they do a biopic of them. It's basically, you know, being one of these, like, mass murderers, or at least an attempted mass murderer, is like an instant free ticket to infamy. And I think that the reason for that is the media ecosystem. And the media ecosystem rewards those people. And so somebody who feels like they've been marginalized, they feel like they've been, not given a fair chance, their message isn't being, seen in the way that they want it to. This is the motivation for them to go out and do one of these shootings. Because now they can get their message read out by everybody. They can, have people remember them, etc. And there's a lot of reward that you get out of that. That's everybody now. Yeah, and so that's why they do it. Natural born killers? No, they're not natural born killers. Like I think somebody that goes and shoots up a school with like young children in it is mentally ill. Like this is what a person that's mentally ill would do. Like average people, normal people don't do that. I'm dead. That's an afternoon in Chicago. Yeah. Otherwise, they're not going to be the next Elon Musk, but they're desperate for people to know them. Yeah, exactly. There was an imam and a mosque that praised the October 7th attacks as well. Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people that support terrorism. We know that. I mean, it's pretty obvious. What is this here? Islamic Center San Diego, like me, Muslim America is targeted today, praying peace. Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of the Islamic identity politics people are going to start immediately playing for, sympathy or something like this. We don't even know what who the shooters were. Like, they could also be Muslim. Like, this is the thing. It's like, as soon as this happens, they're trying to pre-flight and craft a narrative, proactively. Oh, who knows? Never waste a crisis. Yeah. Not dead in a car near a scene. An act of terrorism? Yeah, I mean, it is terrorism. It's a hate crime or terrorism, either one. Imam of the terror mosque. Is this? No, this is something else. This is from a long time ago.
At that mosque. Back to the breaking news we started this show with, the deadly shooting at that mosque in San Diego, the Islamic Center of San Diego. Multiple law enforcement officials just briefed tell CNN that hate speech, bigotry was scrawled on one of the suspects.
There's going to be a press conference? Really?
Let's get right to CNN's Josh Campbell. Josh, tell us more.
Well, San Diego police said a short time ago they were treating this as a hate crime until it's not, is how the police chief described it. But we're getting these critical new details about the alleged suspects in this incident. Multiple law enforcement sources tell CNN that one of the suspects in the shooting took a firearm from their parents' home, left a suicide note that contained writings about racial pride.
Okay, let me see. All right, they might have more information about it with this. Let me open it up. Okay. Let's see what they say about it.
To the families of the 3 that are deceased because of the horrific actions of today. This is a city's and a community's absolute worst nightmare as a free society. And I appreciate all of your patience as we try to work through and piece this scene back together again. I have some updated information that I want to make sure everybody has. At about 9:42 this morning, we received a call of a runaway juvenile.
Yeah.
After speaking with the mom began to piece together bits and pieces of information over an extended period of time. The information that she was gathering and conveying to us began to elevate the threat level that we were perceiving with this information. She believed her son was suicidal, and she began to share information that several of her weapons were missing.
Well, that's pretty bad.
Her vehicle was missing, in addition to her son. She also said that her son was with a companion, and that they were dressed in camo, and that is not consistent with what we would typically see from somebody that is suicidal.
Okay.
That began to trigger a larger threat assessment picture. Our threat management unit began to take the tips and leads that we had and utilize the technology we have available to us. Our license plate readers was at the top of that list. We began to have, we noted that there were hits with the vehicle down in Fashion Valley. We dispatched officers into the area of the mall as a possible location that was a threat. We also gathered information that one of the individuals was associated in some form or fashion with Madison High School. We alerted school police department, and we dispatched officers into the area of Madison High School. While we were gathering this information and we were trying to zero in on where these individuals were at, we received the call .
Nietzsche famously said of his own books, I write in a single sentence what it takes other men a book to write, that it wasn't egotistical because it happened to be true. Beyond Good and Evil is a cardinal work. Nietzsche famously said of his own books, I write in a single sentence what it takes other men a book to write, that it wasn't egotistical because it happened to be true. Beyond Good and Evil is a cardinal work, a prodrome to the entire intellectual and political history of the 20th century. Brilliant, romantic, insightful, deep, psyche-shattering, dancing bit of literary genius. He's had a remarkable impact on thought over the last 140 years. It's reasonable to say that he philosophized with a hammer because his thought is extraordinarily condensed. To read Nietzsche is daunting psychologically. He's like a motivational speaker. He's practical in a way that philosophers seldom are. Nietzschean philosophy is a call to arms. To familiarize yourself with him is to arm yourself against the sea of troubles. And since you will encounter a sea of troubles, you better pray that you're armed. And this is one way to do it. Well, hello everyone. We're going to talk about Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, essentially. That's what I'm going to attempt to cover in this seminar. And so I subtitled this, How to Philosophize with a Hammer, and that's actually a quote from Nietzsche. What does that mean? I think it refers to there are two references implicit in that statement. One is that Nietzsche attempted to break down some of the implicit axiomatic suppositions that had undergirded philosophy prior to the dawn of his thought. And so it's a technical phrase, even though it's poetic, but it's also a psychological phrase. And I think it does refer to the impact that Nietzsche's thought can have on you if you come upon it unaware. He's had a remarkable impact on thought over the last 140 years. And any singular individual who has a remarkable impact on thought has gone down very deep into the structure of our presuppositions and moved them around. You know, we have this intuition of depth, right? All of us know that there's a difference between something that's shallow and something that's deep. And if something inside you that's shallow moves, it doesn't move much of you. And if something inside of you that's deep is moved, it moves a lot of you at the same time. And Nietzsche was someone who philosophized in the depths. And so to read Nietzsche is daunting psychologically, because there's a lot of things that you take for granted that orient you in the world, that make you free of anxiety, that unite you with other people, that give you a direction and a purpose, that stabilize you psychologically. And Nietzsche is one of those thinkers who goes down into the foundations and starts to shift them around. And that can be very destructive. I mean, Nietzsche himself lost his Christian faith, for example, which is an example of that, of a destruction of axiomatic foundation. Now, he attempted to rebuild something else in its stead, but that's no simple thing, given that the entire edifice of Judeo-Christian thought was a collective endeavor unfolding over thousands and thousands of years. To try to replace something like that in a single lifetime, regardless of your degree of brilliance, is one daunting challenge, and it isn't obvious that Nietzsche succeeded, but he did succeed in calling our attention, everyone's attention, to the nature of our unconscious and implicit axiomatic presumptions, and also while taking a hammer to the foundations. I mean, it was Nietzsche, of course, who famously pronounced that God was dead and that we have killed him, by the way, and that we'll never find enough water to wash away the blood. It wasn't a triumphalist statement. It isn't reasonable to say that it was Nietzsche himself who produced the death of God that plagues our society at the current times, because no one thinker is responsible for a transformation of that magnitude. But it is the case that he was able to synthesize that, the criticism of Judeo-Christian ethics, and bring it to a, what would you say, to express that more trenchantly and explicitly than anyone else, just like Freud, not so long afterwards, was able to formulate and make explicit the idea of the unconscious, even though people had been working towards that realization for centuries. And so, how to philosophize with a hammer is to go down into the depths, to look at the axiomatic foundations of philosophic thought, and then to attempt to break that apart. And it's certainly the case that Nietzsche managed that to a great degree. And we're still, all of us, whether we know it or not, are still coping with that consequence. Nietzsche knew, for example, that one of the consequences of, that there would be two consequences of the death of God, and one would be the collapse of a system of meaning that encapsulated people psychologically and socially. The collapse of that system of meaning, Nietzsche believed, would bring about two events. One would be the dawn of a universal nihilism, right? A sense of rootlessness and hopelessness that would pervade Western culture and provide and result in an intense and pervasive demoralization. That and the dawn of the attraction of totalitarian ideologies that would rise to replace God. And Nietzsche was particularly concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. That was one, which is obviously prescient, but more importantly, even than that, was his prophecy that huge swaths of Europe, the Western world for that matter, and as it turned out, the entire world, would become enticed by the blandishments of something like a utopian communism, and that the consequence of that would be the death of tens of millions of people in the 20th century. It's quite a remarkable piece of prophecy, multi-dimensional prophecy, because all of those things transpired. And so the popular image of Nietzsche is a triumphant rationalist, let's say, celebrating the death of God, but that's not accurate. A not accurate representation in the least. He was a much wiser man than that. Now, that doesn't mean that Nietzsche was uncritical admirer, let's say, of the Judeo-Christian ethic, because he also believed that deep within Christianity was a spirit embedded of resentment, slave morality, that would view the world as a battle between, that there was a stream of roughly Christian thought that viewed the world as a battleground between the oppressed and the oppressor, the slave and the master. He believed that Christianity was a manifestation of slave morality that was constantly driven by a form of envy, and that that would culminate in something extraordinarily destructive. Now, I think Nietzsche's thought was weak on that part to some degree. I mean, Nietzsche is a very nuanced thinker, and there's a difference between criticizing Christianity and criticizing Christ, and Nietzsche is ambivalent on that front. I think it might be fair to say that he criticized institutionalized Christianity for its adoption of slave morality, but didn't go so far as to assume that that was part of the ethos of what was central to Christianity itself. Now, Nietzsche wasn't precisely a systematic philosopher. He wrote aphoristically. He wrote using narrative and using poetic tools, which also made him a very strange philosopher and a very strange author and professor, alienated him from his academic community because he didn't write in a dry and academic manner. He had this prophetic and poetic temperament, and so he's a very creative philosopher rather than a rigorous philosopher, and so his thought jumps from place to place. He distrusted systematizers. He was also very ill for much of his life and couldn't write in long bursts and tended to think for extended periods of time and then to summarize all that thought in very short bursts of poetic prose. And that's also, I would say, in some part why it's reasonable to say that he philosophized with a hammer, because his thought is extraordinarily condensed. He'll offer you something, aphorisms, very short statements, paragraphs that are unbelievably dense. And what we're going to do, and I think what will be the most fun in this seminar, is to take a variety of those paragraphs and aphorisms and attempt to unpack them. You can do that endlessly. For example, in a book like Beyond Good and Evil, it's not really a book that you can sit down and read all at once, because there's so much packed into it. And when I read a book, I often earmark a page if there's something that I might want to refer to later. And I've read whole books where I didn't earmark a single page. I don't even bother earmarking a book like Beyond Good and Evil, because I end up earmarking both pages of every page. And so Nietzsche famously said of his own books, I write in a single sentence what it takes other men a book to write. And then he says, what other men can't even write in a book? Which is pretty good, eh? Because it's a hell of an egotistical statement right off the bat, and instantly he tops it with an even more egotistical statement, except that it wasn't egotistical because it happened to be true. And so there's whole fields of endeavor embedded inside Nietzschean thought. The whole corpus of psychoanalytic thought is embedded in paragraphs of Nietzsche's thought, say, in Beyond Good and Evil. And Jung, for example, was a student of Nietzsche's, not directly, right? An admirer of Nietzsche. He published eventually a 1,400-page, I believe it was 1,400-page book on seminar notes on the first 1/3 of Thus Spake Zarathustra. So that's about 40 pages. 1,400 pages of exposition on that, on 1/3 of what's a very small volume. And so there's a tremendous amount to unpack in Nietzsche. And so it's a mustard seed issue. Christ compared the kingdom of God, if I remember correctly, to a mustard seed, this tiny little grain of possibility that can unfold into this remarkable structure. And poetic language in particular, image-laden language, has that proclivity to contain much more than you'd expect given the brevity of the statement. And that's because the meaning isn't just contained in the words, it's contained in the relationship between the words and the relationship between the phrases and the sentences, and then the poetic relationship of the sentences to the corpus of thought that it refers to. And so it can pack a tremendous amount of information into a very small space. That's particularly true if you write poetically. And Nietzsche was a prophetic and revelatory writer. Thus Spake Zarathustra, for example, is written in a kind of intense, emotion-laden Old Testament language, and many people who are flirting with intellectual development fall in love with Thus Spake Zarathustra, which is this poetic work, poetic fairy tale narrative about a prophet who descends back into his community with a revelation at hand. And it's not a good example of the larger corpus of Nietzsche's work, because he's actually a very clear writer and thinker, but it is an example of the degree to which his philosophy wasn't dry rational cognition, but infused with a sense of creative dynamism and poetic inspiration. And again, that's partly what alienated him from the academic community of his time. And still, in some ways, Nietzsche is still a fringe philosopher because he's got this intense romanticism about him. Makes him a dramatic character. He's more like a character in a Dostoevsky novel, which is something that we'll touch on as we move through this, than your let's say typical your typical dry as dust philosopher. He very, very dynamic thinker, and so it's a great adventure intellectually and morally to read Nietzsche. He's a remarkable person, truly prophetic individual. Carl Jung believed, that people lived in at different times at the same time. There's some people in the world now who are really living 100 years in what will be the future, right? They're the people who are establishing what the world's going to be far down the road, and there are people now who live hundreds of years in the past, and maybe the bulk of us are somewhere ensconced in the present, but there are a few people out there who are on the edge of what will be, and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche were certainly on the edge of what would be in the mid-1800s, and they had some sense of what was going to unfold over the next 200 years and could see that with a kind of unerring accuracy. I suppose that's because they could, like Jung, there are people who are capable of seeing the deep undercurrents in society and seeing which way the wind was blowing or which way the zeitgeist was shifting, the spirit of the times. And I think it's often people who are dreamers who are particularly capable of that, because the dream tends to inhabit sort of the edge of the knowable. And both all three, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Jung, were intensely poetic and imaginative people, dreamers, and their writing is imbued with the spirit of the dream, the creative spirit of the dream. And that's partly, I suppose, what distinguishes a prophetic figure from a more programmatic thinker.